I'll primarily focus on this project that I did, the Radcliffe titled measure, and in 2018 to 2019. And when I was invited to the Radcliffe, I do research-based work. So I got these exquisite tours of the various libraries on campus, one of them being the glass plate collection at the Harvard College Observatory. And oh, it's how, okay, there we go. And so when I got to the plate stacks, I have to say that I did not know the story of the Harvard computers. I did not know Henrietta Leavitt's story. It was really through these objects that I learned about their work. And I think that's interesting as an artist, that these objects were what carried the story through time, and that what delivered the story to me, so that the story got there through objects. And they are certainly captivating objects, as you all know. I mean, just like the sleeves themselves, I find exquisite. This one more elaborate with its notations, and even a little sketch of a sequence of stars here. And then you can also see the layers of history. So multiple handwriting, and then this is one of the plates that got water damage. So, but the notations were saved and placed on a new envelope. And the glass plates themselves have such an interesting layer of history. So it's not just the astronomical data that they're capturing, but the plates themselves hold this kind of the history of the technology that enabled this viewing. And then, of course, the layers of handwriting here, you can see a grid was superimposed to sort of find your way among these, their way among these little specks of emulsion. And even I enjoyed like the cracked glass, of course, as an archivist, you're trying to avoid that. But even that just referenced back that this is a physical object that has been preserved and cared for through time. And then that object, these objects hold that story and hold that meaning as well as data. And so here's the one of the many famous, or not many, but several famous photos, a staff portrait on the steps of the Harvard College Observatory. And so, of course, the collective story of the Harvard computers captivated my attention, but Henrietta Leavitt's story in particular captivated my attention, and for a couple reasons. One is of course, her scientific contribution, the fact that she gave us this first tool to measure, beyond parallax, to measure the distance to faraway stars. And so as an artist, I thought, here is this woman who is studying a two-dimensional surface. And from that, a three-dimensional sort of imagining of our cosmos, it can be calculated, can be imagined. So that shift in from 2 to 3 dimensions just right away drew me to her story. And I'll just sort of run quickly through that scientific journey. Of course, here's a plate that multiple computers have worked on, and you might recognize the letter sequence at the bottom here. That's distinctive of Henrietta Leavitt's writing. And then ta-da, the logbooks themselves. They're so glorious. And here in this one, you could see that I love, again, as an artist, that she would do these pencil sketches of star sequences. And I realized, actually, I'll read it now. So I'll reference this in a moment, the publication that we produced alongside my exhibition, which I was really thrilled that we could. But I wrote a short biography of Henrietta Leavitt, and I'll just read the first paragraph because it is really a testament to all of your work and like how meaningful it is to me. I feel like I immediately have to like place my hand on my heart because I'm just so smitten by this story. So my essay starts with the first time I opened one of Henrietta Leavitt's logbooks, I found her there. Not much is known about her personal life. She left scant correspondence and no diary. The pages of her logbooks are her written record. The columns of her calculations and the consistent angle of her cursive speak in a voice that is exacting, observant, penetrating, resourceful, intelligent, willing. Each page is its own composition. The kind of astronomical work Leavitt did has been described as repetitive, tedious women's work. To me, it sings. So I just want to express that what I expressed there, that really this is where I felt like this intimate relationship with Leavitt began. Her handwriting, her precise, her precision, and her active noticing was so powerful and so evident in these logbook pages. So they're just, to me, gorgeous. And I love even just like, I mean, I could spend it, but I love the little that she obviously went back here and scratched out 15, and nope, it's actually a 14.9. And you can see circled is that she's identified a new variable star on this page. Here's another plate with a Levitt sequence, and there's that little VAR. So somehow, some way, she knew that that little speck was a different, scale than on the previous night or year. And so, again, this story is probably familiar to many of you. She discovered, she published this paper, 1,777 variables. She discovered over 2,500 in her lifetime, which was more than half of all known variables at the time. So she's just like, I mean, again, it just obviously her mind was so well matched and skilled at this identification. And I love in this paper, this like simple sentence, it is worthy of notice that in table 6, the brighter variables have the longer periods. And I love that little like one sentence she's saying, it's worthy of notice that there's this relationship. And then here's this relationship. So she graphs it eventually and publishes a paper, 25 variables, and there's that smooth logarithmic curve that's produced. And so of course, astronomers knew that they could find a variable star, determine how bright it was, plug it into this curve, and then if it wasn't as bright as it should be in this curve, that they could calculate the amount of distance causing that light to dim. So they had this distance ladder to the stars, which again, this unfolding, how these small like acts of noticing build and build and build to this unfolding and this imagining of space. So the size, the scale and the shape and size of our Milky Way the galaxy was determined. And then it's almost like a tumbling of discoveries issue from this finding, this relationship. And then of course, here's another famous glass plate, Edwin Hubble's, where he in red and identifies that variable star in the Andromeda galaxy. And I love the exclamation point. And if you think about this plate, right, there's this one moment, there's this one star that he identifies as a variable star, and think of like the foundation, the sort of wide, that here's this mountaintop and that this wide foundation of a base that this discovery is made possible. I mean, it's almost in some ways unfair because I feel like he's shouting from the mountaintop, like variable star. And then we think of the amount of work that's built into that revelation. And so, of course, this variable star is farther away than our galaxy is big. So it's confirmed that the Andromeda galaxy is indeed its own galaxy in its own right. And then this is the part where I speak about that aspect of the scientific narrative. It's just, I mean, it's just like almost like what this narrative just unfolds so beautifully. So there's the scientific impact of her findings, but this plate, of course, is dated 1923, and Levitt had died of stomach cancer in 1921, which almost every time I say that, like literally makes me want to cry. Like I think of her life and work and think of all these discoveries that tumbled forth just in the decade, 1929, Hubble's confirming the expansion of our universe. Like, so in a decade's time of her death, all this awareness that has been built, the reverberations of her finding. So I wanted to make, in some ways a memorial, a testament to her life and work. So what I did was, here's a shot of these two panels in my studio, is I used star calculation software and I calculated the stars sort of tracking across this, or rising at dawn, or should I say fading out as the sun rises. Panel is the stars sort of re-emerging as the sun sets. That light re-emerges on the day of her death above the place of her death, Cambridge. So to do this, I can't, she had her own magnitude system. I had my own magnitude system. So I would, project from my computer with star calculation software what those stars would be 2 hours before dawn. And I had a numeric system of cataloging like how bright these stars were. And then I would play time forward, like one trajectory after another. And with chalk, I would literally go, I mean, each one of these arcs is playing time forward and resetting on my computer, which is a little nuts. Like sometimes you just think, yeah, star trails, let's just, and then you realize like I'm drawing hundreds and hundreds of stars. And I correlate that my numeric system to the thread colors through the grayscale. And so the brighter stars get the thicker, brighter thread, dim stars get further along the grayscale. And then here's a detail image, right, of the stars coming back into view on the evening of her death. So I changed thread through the grayscale to get that light to reemerge until it's at its full brightness. So these are the two panels shown in the Radcliffe gallery. And again, I wanted to make a testament to her work and how significant an impact her work has had on modern cosmology. It is really the foundation of modern cosmology. But I also wanted to honor that space in between. So the space in between the two panels is the same amount of time. So you think of time sort of playing out on the day of her birth, and then there is that space in between before the day of her death. And I wanted to honor you know, those small actions, that way that she built this foundation of knowledge, so that those small acts of noticing and calculating and seeing, they had their own significance and meaning. And partly I do take such comfort in that the Harvard computers were such a tribe, and they really did support one another. For one thing, the fact that they chose not to marry and have children, because that would mean, you know, the societal pressure at that time would mean leaving your occupation, that these women were really dedicated to the work and dedicated to each other. So I wanted to make sure that space in between was held and honored as well. And then across the gallery was this body of work. And these strange shapes are based on a contemporary finding, which is calculating our galaxy and 100,000 other galaxies, neighboring galaxies, are the structure of our galaxy supercluster. So this is a contemporary finding within the last 10 years or so. And each of these weird shapes is actually a rotated view of the same gravitational boundary of our galaxy supercluster. And so, oh, it seemed like skipped ahead to all right, I'll come back to that image. But so you have this one rotated view, we're way out. For some reason it won't show my cursor, but we're way out on a limb there. And so this is sort of the gravitational flow to that basin of attraction at the center of this structure. So it's the largest known structure in the cosmos. Again, so this is just a rotated view, almost like you're just sort of holding this in your hand and sort of seeing it from these strange points of view, this gravitational boundary. And the intensity of stitching did nearly break me. Like, all my work is very labor intensive. This was at a level that was almost absurd, but I wanted to have kind of also give that sense of the amount of data that was pouring and condensing into this finding is just astronomical. Oh, but I'll say, as an offhand, that guess what? Like, the Cepheid variables that Henrietta Leavitt studied, those are still like the foundation. That's still the heartbeat of this contemporary finding. So here we are 100 years later, and her finding is still at the center of new discoveries. So one more, I call this one in my mind the ear, but yeah, this is another strange rotated view. And here's that detail. And you know, there is this way that through the hand stitching, through the act of my hand, I'm integrating this like wide expanse of the cosmos. Also, just this data, like integrating it into the body, into a kind of knowing, into kind of intimacy. And these also, of course, strike me as sort of neural pathways, that these are these moments of connection. And part of what I was trying to do in the exhibition is bridge these moments in time, and these you know, birth and death and black and white and 19th century and 21st century, all these bridges, trying to make these connections. And then another component of the exhibition was this drawing. I made a drawing of the positive and negative plate of the Orion Nebula, which is one of the first places where Henrietta Leavitt looked to find variable stars. And just as we were getting on, Nico and I was saying that he had once tried to mimic Leavitt's way of finding variable stars, right? So you have, this is just I'm just throwing out a positive plate, right? And a negative plate. And if you put that positive, I always flip those over. If you put the negative over the positive, theoretically, right, you would have this halo of light that she could identify if it was in its larger, brighter cycle. Again, I don't really understand how she did that so effectively, because I was even looking at the log. I won't scroll up, but I was looking at that logbook, the one I showed as part of this talk. And the dates, like she was referencing 1904, and then she skips back to 1896 to reference the next nearest plate to find that star. So it's, again, like the fact that it's such these somewhat random, but that she's really integrating. There's all these pieces of information that she is somehow able to integrate and hold and find meaning and understanding through. It just boggles my mind. So I just sort of wanted to take up that, honor that sort of active looking and finding one's way that she Leavitt did in the setting of these glass plates. And I was known as a textile artist. I actually had never made, as an adult, as a grown adult, a pencil drawing. And I just figured, like, well, I'll just figure it out. So I did what she did often, is imposed a grid on my paper. And I just sort of like star by star tried to locate these stars in space and find them, be precise about their shapes, and like, again, find my way. I will also say, negative, way easier to draw like a black space, like a black shape on space. To leave a white space on paper was was another nightmare I had like created for myself. But eventually, over time, we got to yeah, this relationship between positive and negative. And I like that too. Like, there are these binaries, positive and negative, but you find quickly that those binaries dissolve, that the strange shape of a black speck of emulsion versus the lack of, the absence of emulsion is such a different relationship, that these started to have an interesting dialogue with each other. And to me, this action, was quite, it's quite a ridiculous I said, quite an absurd undertaking that I set out for myself, like, make a pencil drawing that you've never done, that you've never done before. But I had such pleasure in the act of sort of looking and finding and reorienting and making, that in that way, that ghost of Henrietta Leavitt, I sort of tried to live in, and it did confirm for me that there was such pleasure in those actions, that it isn't just repetitive, tedious women's work, that it is this vital, vibrant action that then, that builds the meaning, but also holds meaning in its own. And I'm like, who am I talking to? You guys know this very well, right? You guys do repetitive actions. They're scanning and linking and transcribing. And in some ways that can seem like an absurd action, but there is like an intimacy there, and there's a curiosity, and even these small variabilities just, I find, hold my engagement. So I have a feeling I'm among my tribe with you guys. And then here's the publication we put together alongside my exhibition. And you'll notice, what was the cover? Like, there was, the designer came with, traditionally an artist, aka me, like, would have their own artwork on the cover. I was like, no, we will be having a logbook. These things, but so to me, this was like, no, let's put Henrietta's logbook on the cover. So yeah, you can even, what a page this is, right? The Large Magellanic Cloud, there's a sketch there of a star sequence. Yeah, and in another poetic moment, I can see that it's dated March 1921. So she died in December of 1921. So this is towards the end of her life. And in that book, I was happy that we could, talk about my works in the exhibition in greater detail. And then also that, I read that first paragraph to you, that I could really talk about the specifics of her story. And that is one thing as an artist and traditionally a quilt maker. I traditionally make quilts, that quilts carry a story through time. And that's sort of what I wanted this exhibition to do. Just as the glass plates brought Henrietta Leavitt's story to me, I wanted to continue that active carrying of holding kind of space open for her story to be told. And then Jennifer Roberts, who I worked with at Harvard, also added an essay to the catalog, and she could speak to the erasure that's happening as part of the scanning of the glass plates. And yeah, one story I will tell from this, because I happen to lie on the side of, yes, there's astronomical data here, but like the heartbreak and loss. Sam, you were talking to we were talking about physically reading screens, but what, it's interesting, we could talk about what a digital scan of the logbook, how that exists in space versus the physical object. And there is something lost there to me. For one thing, when I stood in front of those plates, when I stand, or when I hold, not hold, but, look at the logbooks, I feel like I'm taking up the same vantage point that these women took. And that felt really significant. I will say that the director, Josh Brindley, visited the exhibition, and he had already been pitched or, pleaded, begged with by various librarians for the value of these markings. And I was very surprised that he emailed us after seeing the exhibition that he did commit to doubling the amount of plates that he's saving from erasure, and then drastically changing and increasing the quality of the scans of the notations. So that was really, it was going from almost like a photograph of a very poor low-res JPEG to these beautiful scans that do exist. So that was really heartening, that sort of the language of art felt like it could yeah, sometimes the language of art speaks in a different way than a scientific one. And then so that was my exhibition at the Radcliffe, and and everyone often, you get that question at an opening or whatever, like, oh, so what are you working on next? And I was sort of like, I'm not ready to let Henry Leavitt go. So I made this additional drawing series called Artifacts, and it's based on this singular plate taken in 1934, plate AX through 309. And it shows, as you can see, the small and large Magellanic Clouds, and then Achenar, the I can't remember, 7th or 8th or 9th brightest star in the sky. So these three primary astronomical objects. But here, this plate, one, it's like, normally the plates, not as many in the collection, have this zoomed out view. But again, it really struck my heart that this plate was taken in 1934. So we could calculate these objects in space. We could see how far, we had a sense of how far away these objects were. We could imagine this plate three-dimensionally, but only because of Henrietta Leavitt's work. In her lifetime, it would be a two-dimensional surface. So that was one thing that captivated me about the plate. And so I made this overall drawing of the plate. But then this particular plate had this strange, emphasized warping at the edge, sorry. And that's another thing that's to marvel at Henrietta Leavitt. It's not like all the data was perfectly presented and crisp. Like, so for example, at this edge of this plate, there's huge, these strange artifacts are produced. There's a tremendous amount of warping from the telescope's lens. And those artifacts struck me as fascinating. They sort of looked like these winged creatures. So I went in and I zoomed into certain sections of the plate and drew these artifacts, just again, star by star. I was just captivated by how unique each plate was. So you can see here at the edges how extreme and strange. And I like sort of call this like the dragonfly section. There's these various sections of the plate. And here Jennifer Roberts took this image with her macro lens. So the exquisiteness, even though, for astronomers, they might be, well, this is kind of useless data. This is not, this isn't helpful data. This is an artifact. It's, but I think there's also a way that, again, the language of art, sometimes that the active looking and noticing that Henrietta Leavitt committed to this work, I sort of poured into these drawings as a way to honor her. So here's the huge artifact, of course, of Achenar, but then these other strange moths and dragonflies and insects around it. So I did a series of these 7 drawings here. I included the plate edge, which was kind of fun because, again, that's its own layer of history and information. So these strange sort of peeling emulsion at the edges of the plate. And I also enjoyed too. So here, this drawing had the large Magellanic Cloud more as a focal point, but I really enjoyed as an artist playing with composition that these sort of all over patterns, that it was just really the shapes and the patterns of themselves that were prominent versus sort of being like, oh, I'll center this and put this here and here. It's sort of this way that the eye travels across the plate. And then my drawings became their own kind of glass plate objects in themselves. You can see how indented, like I had to do layering. It wasn't like I could just say like, okay, this one's really dark, I'm gonna stay there. I kind of had to like notate and locate each one and then sketch out the shape and come back and layer it darker and darker and darker. So by the edge, you get these sort of divoted surface. So it's like its own sort of sculptural object. And then this is another gorgeous macro shot by Jennifer Roberts. I love how you can see that that's simply the shine. It's almost because I repeated that shape that the surface actually gets burnished smooth. And then the light is just catching that. So I love that the positive and negative and light and dark and birth and death come back. The themes of the exhibition come back in this, macro image. So